Welcome to Pages from History. Today we're uncovering the shocking truth about the fall of the Roman Empire and what really happened. For over 1,000 years, Rome stood as the greatest civilization the world had ever seen. Then, in less than 2 centuries, it all came crashing down. But here's what they never taught you in school. The fall of Rome wasn't caused by one thing. It was a perfect storm of disasters that should have been impossible to survive. What you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about history's greatest empire. Stay with me until the end. First segment, the crisis of the 3rd century, how Rome nearly fell apart 200 years earlier. The year is 235. The Roman Empire stretches from the misty forests of Britain to the burning deserts of North Africa, from the Atlantic Ocean to the rivers of Mesopotamia. Over 100 million people live under Roman rule. The greatest cities in the world bear Roman names. The most powerful armies march under Roman eagles. The wealthiest merchants trade in Roman currency. For nearly 500 years, Rome has been the undisputed master of the Mediterranean world. But on a cold March morning, in the German frontier, everything begins to unravel. Emperor Alexander Severus, the young ruler who has tried desperately to maintain peace and prosperity, lies dead in his tent. His own soldiers have murdered him. They are angry about unpaid wages, frustrated with diplomatic solutions to military problems, and hungry for a leader who will let them plunder and conquer. The assassins proclaim Maximinus Thrax, a giant of a man from the barbaric provinces, as the new emperor. He is the first emperor who has never even visited Rome. He is also the first emperor who cannot read or write Latin properly. The old senatorial class is horrified. The ancient traditions are crumbling. What follows is 50 years of chaos that nearly destroys Rome forever. Historians call it the crisis of the 3rd century. But this dry academic name doesn't capture the horror of what ordinary Romans experienced. Imagine living in a world where the government collapses, the economy fails, foreign armies invade, plagues sweep through cities, and rival generals fight endless civil wars while the empire burns. That was the reality for millions of people across the Roman world. In those 50 years, more than 50 men claimed the title of emperor. Most reigned for only months before being murdered by their own soldiers or killed in battle by rivals. The Senate, once the proud guardian of Roman tradition, becomes irrelevant. Real power belongs to whoever commands the largest army. Legions that once defended the frontiers now march against each other in brutal civil wars. The professional army that conquered the known world transforms into gangs of armed thugs who auction the imperial throne to the highest bidder. The economic consequences are catastrophic. To pay their soldiers, emperors debase the currency by reducing the silver content of coins. At the start of the crisis, a Roman denarius contains 95% silver. By the end, it contains less than 5%. Merchants refuse to accept government money. They return to bartering goods directly. Prices spiral out of control. A measure of wheat that cost 8 denarii in the year 200 costs 200 denarii by the year 300. Savings become worthless overnight. The middle class is wiped out. Only those who own land or trade in gold can preserve their wealth. The frontiers collapse under relentless pressure. Germanic tribes, sensing Roman weakness, cross the Rhine and Danube rivers in massive waves. They are not just raiding anymore. Entire peoples are migrating, fleeing even more terrifying enemies from the east. The Goths, A fierce Germanic confederation smash through the Danube defenses and pour into the Balkans. In the year 251, they defeat and kill Emperor Decius in battle. This is the first time in 800 years that a Roman emperor has fallen in combat against foreign enemies. The shock reverberates throughout the empire. If emperors can die like common soldiers, what does that say about Roman invincibility? The eastern frontier fares even worse. The Persian Empire, recently revitalized under the aggressive Sassanid dynasty, launches devastating invasions into Roman Syria and Asia Minor. These are not the old Parthians who fought cautiously and retreated when faced with determined resistance. The Sassanid Persians are organized, fanatical, and determined to reclaim all the territories that ancient Persia once ruled. In the year 260, the unthinkable happens. Emperor Valerian leads a massive army against the Persians and is defeated in battle. He is captured alive. The Romans have lost emperors to assassination, poison, and battle before, but never to capture, never to humiliation. The Persian king Shapur uses the captured Roman emperor as a footstool when mounting his horse. Valerian spends the rest of his life in chains, a living symbol of Roman humiliation. When he finally dies, the Persians skin his corpse and stuff it with straw, displaying it in a temple as a trophy. The psychological impact on the Roman world is devastating. How can an empire survive when its own emperor becomes a barbarian's footstool? Cities that have lived in peace for centuries suddenly find themselves on the front lines. Ancient walls that have stood unrepaired for generations are hastily rebuilt. Citizens who have never held weapons train in makeshift militias. Wealthy families flee to the countryside, abandoning urban life for fortified estates. The vibrant cosmopolitan culture that defined Roman civilization begins to fragment. Regional identities resurface. Local strongmen offer protection that the distant emperor cannot provide. The empire begins to break into pieces. In Gaul, a capable general named Postumus declares himself emperor and establishes what historians call the Gallic Empire. He controls Britain, Gaul, and parts of Spain. He mints his own coins, maintains his own army, and governs effectively. He doesn't march on Rome or try to claim the whole empire. He simply secures his own territory and keeps the Germans out. For 14 years, he provides the security and stability that the central government cannot. The people of Gaul are grateful. Why should they care about emperors in Rome who cannot protect them? In the east, the wealthy city of Palmyra rises to prominence under Queen Zenobia, one of the most remarkable figures of the ancient world. After her husband is assassinated, she takes control of the Palmyrene army and launches a series of brilliant campaigns. She conquers Egypt, capturing the vital grain supplies that feed Rome itself. She occupies Syria, Asia Minor, and much of the eastern provinces. Like Postumus in the west, she claims to rule in Rome's name, but everyone knows she is building her own empire. She styles herself as the new Cleopatra, a warrior queen who will restore Eastern glory. The Roman Empire has fractured into three parts. The legitimate emperors in Rome control only Italy, the Balkans, and North Africa. Real power has shifted to breakaway kingdoms in the east and west. Enemies circle like wolves around wounded prey. The Goths ravage the Balkans and Greece, even sacking Athens itself. Germanic tribes raid deep into Gaul and Spain. The Persians occupy Roman Mesopotamia. Berber raiders attack North African cities. Plague sweeps through the empire repeatedly. killing perhaps 30% of the population. Entire regions are depopulated, fields lie untilled, villages are abandoned, trade routes become too dangerous to travel. Tax collection collapses because there is no one left to tax. The government cannot pay the army. Soldiers mutiny and proclaim new emperors who promise them wealth and plunder. Each new emperor triggers a new round of civil war. The administrative machinery that has governed the empire for centuries breaks down. Laws are ignored. Justice becomes arbitrary. The strong prey on the weak without consequence. Many historians believe that if the crisis had continued for another generation, the Roman Empire would have disappeared completely, fractured into dozens of successor kingdoms like the Empire of Alexander the Great. But then something remarkable happens. A series of capable military emperors emerges from the chaos. They are tough professional soldiers from the Balkan provinces, men who have risen through the ranks by merit rather than birth. They understand warfare. They are ruthless with traitors and competent with administration. They don't care about senatorial approval or traditional legitimacy. They care about results. Emperor Claudius Gothicus defeats the Goths in a massive battle in the Balkans, killing 50,000 enemy warriors and breaking their power for a generation. His successor, Aurelian, is even more impressive. In just 5 years, he reconquers the breakaway territories and reunites the empire. He defeats the Palmyrene forces and captures Queen Zenobia, bringing her to Rome in golden chains for his triumph. He smashes the Gallic Empire and reclaims the western provinces. He builds massive new walls around Rome itself, acknowledging that the Eternal City is no longer safe from attack. He stabilizes the currency and restores some economic order. Most importantly, Aurelian transforms the nature of Roman imperial power. He abandons the fiction that the emperor is merely the first citizen who serves at the pleasure of the Senate and people. Instead, he styles himself as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. He wears a jeweled crown and robes of purple silk. He demands that subjects prostrate themselves in his presence. He creates elaborate court ceremonies borrowed from Persian kings. The old Roman Republic, which had survived in modified form for 5 centuries under the emperors, finally dies. What emerges is an absolute monarchy, a divine kingship that rules by military might and religious authority. His successors continue this transformation. Emperor Diocletian, who takes power in 284, completely reorganizes the empire. He recognizes that one man can no longer rule such vast territories effectively. He divides the empire into eastern and western halves, each ruled by a senior emperor called an Augustus. Each Augustus chooses a junior emperor called a Caesar, who will eventually succeed him. This system, called the Tetrarchy, or Rule of 4, is designed to end the chaos of disputed successions. When an Augustus retires or dies, his Caesar becomes the new Augustus and chooses his own Caesar. The cycle continues peacefully without civil war. Diocletian also massively expands the army and the bureaucracy. He doubles the number of legions, creating a mobile field army that can respond rapidly to threats while border troops hold the frontiers. He reorganizes the provinces, breaking large territories into smaller administrative units that are easier to control and less likely to support regional usurpers. He creates a vast civil service of tax collectors, record keepers, and administrators who owe their positions to imperial appointment rather than local connections. He fixes maximum prices for goods and services, trying to control the inflation that has devastated the economy. The costs are enormous. To pay for this massive expansion of government and military, Diocletian must squeeze the population harder than ever before. He reforms the tax system, making it more efficient and more brutal. Taxes are assessed on land and population. Local city councils are made personally responsible for collecting the required amounts. If the harvest fails or the population declines, the city councillors must pay the difference from their own wealth. Being a city councillor, once a position of honor and prestige, becomes a hereditary burden that families desperately try to escape. Farmers are bound to the land. If they flee to the cities to escape taxation, they are hunted down and returned. Their children and grandchildren are legally required to remain on the same land, farming for the same landlords. This is the beginning of serfdom, the system that will define medieval Europe for 1,000 years. Free peasant farmers, the backbone of the early Roman Republic, transform into bound laborers with few rights and no mobility. The empire survives the crisis of the 3rd century, but it emerges fundamentally transformed. The old Roman world of republican traditions, civic participation, and cultural confidence is gone. What replaces it is a rigid, hierarchical, militarized state that demands absolute obedience and extracts wealth ruthlessly to maintain its armies. The cities, once centers of prosperity and culture, begin a long decline. The economy shifts from trade and manufacture to subsistence agriculture. Social mobility vanishes as occupations become hereditary and regulated. Individual freedom gives way to collective security. Can you imagine living through such a transformation? Watching the world you knew collapse and be replaced by something harsh and strange? This is what millions of Romans experienced. The elderly remembered a time of prosperity and peace. The young knew only war, taxation, and fear. The crisis of the 3rd century is a preview of what is coming. The reforms of Diocletian and his successors buy the empire another 2 centuries of existence. But they cannot reverse the fundamental changes in Roman society and economy. The seeds of the final collapse have already been planted. The question is not whether Rome will fall, but when and how. Second segment, the empire divided, East versus West, and the seeds of destruction. The reforms of Diocletian stabilize the empire, but they also create a problem that will eventually destroy it. By dividing power between multiple emperors, Diocletian hopes to prevent civil wars. Instead, he guarantees them. The Tetrarchy collapses almost immediately after Diocletian retires in 305. The carefully planned succession breaks down as ambitious generals fight for control. Within a year, 6 men claim to be emperor. The army groups choose sides. The provinces split their loyalties. The civil wars resume with renewed fury. From this chaos emerges Constantine, the son of one of the original tetrarchs. He is a brilliant general and a ruthless politician. In 312, he marches on Rome itself to challenge his rival Maxentius. Before the decisive battle at the Milvian Bridge, Constantine has a vision. He sees a cross of light in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." Whether this vision is genuine religious experience, political calculation, or later propaganda, no one can say for certain. But Constantine orders his soldiers to paint Christian symbols on their shields. They win a crushing victory. Maxentius drowns in the Tiber River trying to escape. Constantine enters Rome as sole emperor of the West. Constantine makes another decision that shapes the future. Rome, the eternal city, is too associated with the old pagan Senate and traditional aristocracy. Constantine needs a capital that is truly his own, a city that owes everything to him. In 330, He inaugurates Constantinople, built on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. The location is perfect. It sits on the Bosporus, controlling the passage between Europe and Asia. It commands trade routes from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. It is close to the wealthy eastern provinces and the dangerous Persian frontier. Most importantly, it is a Christian city from the beginning, free from pagan temples and senatorial opposition. Constantinople grows rapidly into one of the greatest cities the world has ever seen. Constantine and his successors pour resources into building massive walls, magnificent churches, grand palaces, and bustling markets. The city attracts merchants, scholars, and artisans from across the empire. Within a generation, it rivals Rome in size and surpasses it in importance. The political center of gravity shifts east. Future emperors spend most of their time in Constantinople, not Rome. The western capital moves to Milan, then to Ravenna, anywhere except the ancient city on the Tiber. This geographical shift reflects deeper economic realities. The eastern provinces are simply richer than the west. Egypt produces vast quantities of grain. Syria and Asia Minor are densely populated and highly urbanized. The eastern trade routes bring silk from China, spices from India, and precious stones from Persia. Eastern cities have large populations of skilled craftsmen producing luxury goods. The tax revenues from the east dwarf what the western provinces can generate. When emperors need money to pay armies or build monuments, they look east. The empire officially divides in 395 when Emperor Theodosius dies, leaving the east to one son and the west to another. This is supposed to be a temporary administrative convenience. Both halves remain parts of a single Roman Empire. They share the same laws, the same culture, the same identity, but they never reunite. The Eastern and Western courts develop different priorities and interests. They compete for resources and prestige. They sometimes refuse to help each other against common enemies. The Roman Empire is becoming two empires, even if no one wants to admit it yet. The Goths revolt. In 378, at the Battle of Adrianople, they destroy a Roman army and kill Emperor Valens. This is not a border raid or a temporary setback. The Goths established themselves permanently inside Roman territory in the Balkans. They remain as a semi-independent military force, sometimes allied with Rome, sometimes hostile, always dangerous. Future emperors must negotiate with them as equals, not command them as subjects. The precedent is catastrophic. If one barbarian group can successfully defy Rome and carve out territory inside the empire, why not others? On the last day of the year 406, a massive confederation of Germanic tribes crosses the frozen Rhine River. The western frontier has been breached. Vandals, Alans, Suevi, and others pour into Gaul. The undermanned Roman forces cannot stop them. The barbarians rampage through the provinces, looting cities, burning villas, and slaughtering those who resist. Some cities surrender without a fight, hoping to preserve themselves through negotiation. The province of Gaul, once one of the richest parts of the empire, is devastated. Refugees flee south into Italy or west into Spain. Italy itself is no longer safe. In 408, a Gothic king named Alaric leads his warriors into northern Italy. He has been a Roman ally, then a Roman enemy, then an ally again. Now he is angry about broken promises and unpaid subsidies. He besieges Rome itself. The Senate negotiates, paying enormous ransoms in gold and silver. Alaric withdraws, but returns the following year when payments stop. In 410, his patience exhausted, Alaric orders his warriors to sack the Eternal City. For 3 days, the Goths plunder Rome. They strip the palaces and temples of their treasures. They loot the wealthy homes of senators and merchants. They carry off thousands of captives to be sold as slaves. They respect Christian churches, sparing many lives because Alaric is himself a Christian, though of the Arian heresy that the mainstream church considers wrong. The physical damage is relatively limited. Rome has been looted, not destroyed. But the psychological impact is devastating. Rome has not been captured by foreign enemies in 800 years. The Eternal City was supposed to be inviolable, protected by the gods and by destiny. Now, Gothic warriors, barbarians who could not read or write Latin, have walked through the streets as conquerors. They have rifled through the Senate House. They have stripped gold from ancient temples. They have drunk wine from the cellars of emperors. The news spreads shock throughout the empire and beyond. Jerome, the great Christian scholar living in Bethlehem, writes that when he heard Rome had fallen, his voice stuck in his throat, and sobs choked his words. If Rome can fall, what is safe? What can endure? St. Augustine writes his masterpiece, City of God, partly in response to pagan critics who blame Christianity for weakening Rome. Augustine argues that earthly cities, even Rome, are temporary and imperfect. Only the heavenly city of God endures forever. Christians should not mourn Rome's fall too much because their true home is in heaven. This theological argument is profound and influential, but it also represents a psychological surrender. The idea that Rome might fall, and that this might be acceptable, even part of God's plan, would have been unthinkable 2 centuries earlier. The Western Empire continues to decline. Vandals cross from Spain into North Africa, conquering Rome's richest remaining provinces. They capture Carthage in 439, gaining control of the vital grain fleet that feeds Italy. The Western Emperor can no longer feed Rome itself without importing grain from the east. The Vandals build a fleet and launch pirate raids throughout the Mediterranean. In 455, they sail up the Tiber and sack Rome again, looting even more thoroughly than the Goths had 45 years earlier. Gaul and Spain are divided among various Germanic kingdoms. The Visigoths control most of Spain and southern Gaul. The Burgundians settle in eastern Gaul. The Franks occupy the north. These barbarian kings theoretically rule in the name of the Roman emperor, but everyone knows they are independent rulers. They mint their own coins, make their own laws, and fight their own wars. The Western emperor controls little beyond Italy, and even that control is shaky. Real power in the West shifts to military strongmen, usually of barbarian origin, who command the imperial army. They make and unmake emperors at will. Ricimer, a general of Gothic and Suevic ancestry, controls the Western Empire for 16 years, deposing and murdering several emperors who displease him. Odoacer, a Germanic warrior, commands the loyalty of the army in Italy. These men don't want to be emperor themselves. They are not Roman enough, and they know it. But they are content to wield power through puppet emperors who issue orders that the generals write. The Eastern Empire watches this Western collapse with a mixture of horror and relief. Horror because the fall of the West represents the end of Roman universality. Relief because Eastern resources are no longer drained trying to save the unsavable. The Eastern emperors, secure behind the massive walls of Constantinople and supported by the wealth of Egypt and Asia Minor, focus on their own survival. They face the Persians in the east and manage the Balkans in the west. They occasionally send help to the Western Empire, but never enough to truly matter. The Eastern court develops its own distinct character. Greek becomes more important than Latin. Eastern Christianity, influenced by Greek philosophy and Middle Eastern mysticism, diverges from Western Christianity. The emperor in Constantinople is more autocratic, more ceremonial, more removed from his subjects than Western emperors ever were. The bureaucracy is more elaborate and more corrupt. But the system works. The East has found a formula for survival that will last another 1,000 years. The two halves of the empire are drifting apart culturally and politically. Eastern Romans begin to view Westerners as crude and backward. Western Romans resent Eastern wealth and Eastern refusal to share resources. When the Western Empire finally falls, the East does not collapse in sympathy. It continues as if nothing fundamental has changed, claiming to be the true continuation of Rome. In many ways, it is right. But it is a very different Rome from the one that conquered the Mediterranean world. The religious divide deepens these political and cultural splits. The Bishop of Rome, claiming authority as the successor of St. Peter, asserts primacy over all other bishops. The Eastern patriarchs, especially the Patriarch of Constantinople, reject this claim. They argue for a council of equals rather than papal monarchy. Theological disputes over the nature of Christ, the role of icons, and proper church practice create bitter controversies. Emperors try to impose religious unity by force, but only create resentment and resistance. The economy of the late empire looks nothing like the prosperous trade network of the early empire. Long-distance trade has collapsed. The Mediterranean is no longer a Roman lake, but a frontier zone threatened by Vandal pirates. Cities shrink in size and importance. The wealthy abandon urban life for fortified country estates where they can control agricultural production directly. The middle class disappears, crushed between aristocratic landlords and impoverished peasant tenants. Money becomes scarce. Barter replaces currency in many transactions. Literacy declines as schools close and books become rare luxuries. The military changes reflect these economic realities. The old citizen legions are gone. The army now consists of barbarian federates who fight under their own leaders in exchange for land and subsidies. Roman generals command armies made up largely of Goths, Vandals, Huns, and other tribesmen who have little loyalty to Rome itself. They fight for pay, for land, for the right to settle inside the empire. When the pay stops or a better offer appears, they switch sides without hesitation. The idea of Roman military discipline and Roman military virtue becomes a memory of better times. Taxation is crushing but inefficient. The government needs enormous revenues to pay barbarian armies and maintain the bureaucracy. But the tax base keeps shrinking as population declines and economic activity contracts. The government responds by raising rates and expanding the number of tax collectors. This makes the burden even heavier on those who cannot escape. The rich use their influence to gain exemptions. The middle class is destroyed trying to meet obligations. The poor flee to the countryside or into the church, seeking any shelter from the collectors. The church becomes the one institution that still functions effectively across the empire. Bishops often provide the only real governance in cities where imperial administration has collapsed. They organize food distribution during famines. They negotiate with barbarian leaders. They maintain schools and libraries. They care for the poor and sick. As the empire weakens, the church grows stronger, filling the vacuum. In the West especially, bishops become more important than generals or governors. When Rome itself is besieged or threatened, it is the Pope who negotiates with the barbarian kings, not the emperor. The cultural psychology changes in ways that are hard to measure, but impossible to ignore. People stop believing in progress. The future looks worse than the past. The old stories of Roman greatness, Roman virtue, and Roman destiny ring hollow when barbarian kings rule from Roman palaces and Roman cities lie in ruins. Some turn to Christianity with renewed fervor, seeing earthly suffering as preparation for heavenly reward. Others cling to pagan traditions, believing that abandoning the old gods brought this disaster. Most simply try to survive, day by day, in a world that grows darker and more dangerous. Third segment, the final collapse, when the eternal city fell and the ancient world ended. The year is 476. In the palace at Ravenna, a teenage boy named Romulus Augustulus sits on the throne of the Western Roman Empire. His name is bitterly ironic. Romulus was the legendary founder of Rome. Augustus was the first and greatest emperor. But this Romulus Augustus, mockingly called Augustulus, the little Augustus, is neither founder nor emperor in any meaningful sense. He is a puppet placed on the throne by his father, a minor Roman official. He has no army, no authority, and no future. The real power in Italy belongs to Odoacer, a Germanic warrior who commands the barbarian federates that make up the imperial army. These soldiers are angry. They have not been paid properly in months. The imperial treasury is empty. The Western Empire no longer controls enough territory to generate the taxes needed to pay an army. The soldiers demand what every barbarian army has wanted for the past century: land. They want to settle permanently in Italy with their families. They want 1/3 of the estates of Roman landowners. They want to become the new ruling class. Odoacer knows that the emperor cannot grant this request. The Roman Senate and the Italian aristocracy would never accept such a massive confiscation of property. But Odoacer also knows that the emperor has no choice. The army will take what it wants, whether the emperor agrees or not. So Odoacer decides to eliminate the pretense. Why maintain the fiction of a powerless emperor? Why continue the charade of Roman authority when everyone knows it is meaningless? On September 4th, 476, Odoacer marches into Ravenna with his army. He forces young Romulus Augustulus to abdicate. The boy emperor, who has worn the purple for less than a year, is stripped of his title and his symbols of office. Odoacer is generous in his mercy. He does not kill the boy. Instead, he gives him a pension and sends him to live in a villa in southern Italy. Romulus Augustulus disappears from history, probably living quietly for decades as a private citizen. He is the last Roman emperor in the West, though he barely qualifies as either Roman or emperor. Odoacer does something unexpected. He does not proclaim himself emperor. He is not interested in claiming Roman legitimacy. Instead, he sends the imperial regalia, the crown and the purple robes, to Constantinople. He informs Emperor Zeno that the West no longer needs its own emperor. One emperor ruling from Constantinople is sufficient for the whole Roman Empire. Odoacer will govern Italy as Zeno's representative, as patrician and king of Italy. He will rule in Rome's name, but as a barbarian king, not as a Roman official. This is the moment when the Western Roman Empire ends, though few people at the time recognize it as such. There is no dramatic battle, no burning of Rome, no slaughter of senators. The empire does not fall with a crash. It simply fades away, its last emperor pensioned off, and its government replaced by a barbarian kingdom that claims to respect Roman traditions. Many Romans in Italy barely notice the change. The Senate continues to meet, the consuls are still appointed. Roman law is still enforced, at least in theory. Daily life goes on much as before. But something fundamental has shifted. For over 1,000 years, since the legendary founding of Rome in 753 before Christ, there has been a Roman state. Kingdom, republic, empire. The form changed, but Rome endured. Now for the first time there is no Roman emperor in the West. The continuous line of authority stretching back through Constantine, through Augustus, through the consuls of the Republic to Romulus himself, has been broken. The West has entered a new age. The Eastern Empire refuses to accept this reality. Emperor Zeno does not recognize Odoacer as legitimate. When he feels strong enough, Zeno encourages another barbarian king, Theodoric of the Ostrogoths, to invade Italy and overthrow Odoacer. Theodoric is happy to oblige. He leads his entire people, warriors and families together from the Balkans into Italy. The war lasts 4 years. Cities are besieged. Armies clash. The Italian countryside is ravaged. Finally, in 493, Theodoric invites Odoacer to a banquet to negotiate peace. During the feast, Theodoric personally kills Odoacer, cutting him down with a sword. Theodoric's followers then murder Odoacer's family and supporters. The Ostrogoths become the new rulers of Italy. Theodoric proves to be one of the most capable rulers Italy has seen in generations. He maintains Roman administration and law. He employs Roman officials and respects the Senate. He protects Roman culture and encourages learning. He repairs aqueducts, rebuilds cities, and promotes trade. He keeps the Goths and Romans separate, with different laws for each people, trying to preserve both cultures. Under Theodoric, Italy experiences a brief golden age, a final flowering of Roman civilization under barbarian rule. But Theodoric's kingdom dies with him. When he passes away in 526, his successors fight among themselves. The Eastern Emperor Justinian sees an opportunity. He dreams of reconquering the lost western provinces and restoring the Roman Empire to its ancient glory. In 535, he sends his brilliant general Belisarius to invade Italy with a relatively small but highly professional army. What follows is one of the most destructive wars in Italian history. The Gothic kings resist fiercely. Cities change hands repeatedly. Sieges last for months or years. The Italian countryside is devastated by armies living off the land. The population collapses from warfare, famine, and plague. Ancient cities like Milan and Naples are stormed and sacked. Rome itself is besieged 5 times. The ancient aqueducts that have supplied the city with fresh water for centuries are cut. The population, which once numbered over 1 million, falls to perhaps 30,000 people huddling in the ruins. The war lasts 20 years. By the time it ends in 554, Italy is a wasteland. The Goths are defeated, but there is almost nothing left to govern. The cities are depopulated. The estates are abandoned. The irrigation systems have collapsed. The trade networks are destroyed. Justinian has won a Pyrrhic victory, reconquering a desert and calling it peace. Within 15 years, a new barbarian people, the Lombards, will invade Italy and conquer most of it, reducing Byzantine control to scattered coastal regions. The Eastern Empire, which men increasingly call the Byzantine Empire to distinguish it from the fallen Western Empire, continues for another 900 years. But it is not the Roman Empire of Augustus, or even of Constantine. It is a Greek Christian empire, preserving Roman law and Roman titles, but fundamentally transformed in language, culture, and religion. The Byzantines called themselves Romans. They maintain the imperial ideology, but they are something new, a fusion of Roman political structure, Greek culture, and Christian faith. In the former Western provinces, new kingdoms emerge from the ruins of Roman authority. The Franks dominate Gaul, eventually giving their name to France. The Visigoths rule Spain until conquered by Muslim invaders in the 8th century. The Angles and Saxons control most of Britain, pushing the Romano-British population to the Celtic fringes. The Vandals hold North Africa until reconquered by Justinian's armies. These barbarian kingdoms maintain some Roman forms. They issue laws in Latin. They employ Roman administrators. They claim authority from the emperor in Constantinople, even when that authority is purely theoretical. But the world these kingdoms inhabit is profoundly different from the Roman world. Cities shrink or disappear. Stone buildings are scavenged for materials. Roads fall into disrepair. Literacy becomes rare outside monasteries. Long-distance trade collapses. Local self-sufficiency replaces economic integration. Political authority fragments among countless local lords, bishops, and kings. The Mediterranean unity that Rome created shatters into hundreds of pieces. This is the beginning of the Middle Ages, a 1,000-year period when Europe will rebuild slowly from the ruins of Rome. What really caused this collapse? The question has obsessed historians for 1,500 years. Some blame Christianity for weakening Roman military virtue and redirecting resources to churches instead of armies. Some blame barbarian invasions for overwhelming Roman defenses. Some blame internal decay, corruption, and the loss of civic spirit. Some blame economic crisis, plague, and climate change. The truth is that all of these factors interacted in complex ways. The empire faced challenges it could not overcome. The climate deteriorated in the 5th and 6th centuries, reducing agricultural productivity and forcing barbarian migrations. Plague pandemics killed millions, depopulating cities and reducing tax revenues. The economy could not support both a large army and a large bureaucracy. The political system could not produce consistently capable emperors. The military could not defend all frontiers simultaneously against multiple enemies. The society could not integrate barbarian settlers without losing its Roman identity. Perhaps the real question is not why Rome fell, but how it survived for so long. The empire lasted over 1,000 years in the West, and over 2,000 years if we count the Byzantine continuation. It brought unprecedented peace and prosperity to the Mediterranean world. It created a common culture and a common law that still influences us today. It preserved Greek learning and transmitted it to the future. It provided the vehicle for Christianity to spread throughout Europe. Its legacy is everywhere in our languages, our laws, our architecture, our political ideas. The fall of Rome was not a simple event, but a long process of transformation. The ancient world did not end on one day in 476. It had been ending for centuries as Roman and barbarian fused into something new. The medieval world that emerged from Rome's ruins carried forward much of Roman civilization, even while transforming it. The Renaissance would later look back to Rome for inspiration. The Enlightenment would study Roman law and Roman philosophy. Modern democracies would model themselves on the Roman Republic. The idea of Rome never died, even when the empire fell. Standing in the ruins of the Roman Forum today, you can still see the columns where senators debated, the temples where emperors worshipped, the arches that celebrated military triumphs. These stones have stood for 2,000 years, outlasting the empire that built them. They remind us that even the mightiest civilizations are temporary. They rise, they flourish, they decline, they fall, but they also leave something behind. Ideas, institutions, achievements that outlive the society that created them. Rome fell because it faced too many challenges simultaneously. Military pressure on the frontiers, economic crisis at home, political instability, social transformation, environmental change, disease and cultural shift all converged in a perfect storm that no government could survive. The empire adapted as long as it could. It reformed its administration, reorganized its army, embraced a new religion, divided its territories, and fought desperately to survive. For a while, these adaptations worked, but eventually the weight of accumulated problems became too great. The lesson of Rome's fall is not that decline is inevitable. It is that survival requires constant adaptation, that no achievement is permanent, that vigilance and wisdom are the price of civilization. The Romans became complacent. They believed their empire was eternal, that destiny guaranteed their dominance. They ignored warning signs, postponed difficult decisions, and hoped their problems would solve themselves. When the crisis came, they discovered that their institutions were hollow, their resources exhausted, their unity fractured. We can see ourselves in this story. Every civilization faces the same challenges Rome faced. How do we defend ourselves without bankrupting our economy? How do we maintain unity in diversity? How do we adapt to changing conditions without losing our identity? How do we preserve what is valuable from the past while embracing necessary change? How do we recognize when our institutions no longer serve their purpose and find the courage to reform them? These are timeless questions, as relevant today as they were in the 5th century. The fall of Rome teaches us humility. No matter how powerful, how wealthy, how culturally advanced a civilization becomes, it can fall. But it also teaches us hope. Rome fell, but much of what Rome achieved survived. The language, the law, the architecture, the ideas, the faith, all these continued and shaped the future. When we study the past, we discover that endings are also beginnings. The fall of Rome was the birth of medieval Europe, which would eventually create its own remarkable civilization. The story of Rome's fall is ultimately a human story. It is about people trying to navigate impossible circumstances, making difficult choices with incomplete information, struggling to preserve what they value against overwhelming odds. Some were heroes who fought bravely, some were villains who pursued selfish interests. Most were ordinary people trying to survive and protect their families. They all contributed to the story, their individual actions combining to create the grand narrative of Rome's decline and fall. And so today we discovered that the fall of Rome wasn't a single catastrophic event, but a centuries-long transformation driven by military pressure, economic collapse, political division, and cultural change. Personally, I believe that Rome's greatest lesson is that no civilization is guaranteed survival. Constant adaptation and wisdom are required to preserve what we value. What do you think? Could Rome have been saved if different choices had been made? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this epic journey through history, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Pages from History, and turn on notifications for more incredible historical documentaries. Thank you for watching. See you in the next chapter of history.